Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.
Oliver Varhelyi, European Commissioner for European Neighbourhood Policy and Enlargement, declared that Georgia has fulfilled only 3 of the 12 priorities and has achieved certain progress in 7 directions out of 12 priorities set by the European Commission. He stated this while presenting an oral report on the progress made by Georgia, Ukraine and Moldova in terms of reforms in Stockholm.
This leads me to Georgia, where 12 priorities were identified in our June opinion, and we see that 3 of these have been completed. First, on gender equality and fighting violence against women. Second, taking into account European Court of Human Rights judgments in court deliberations. And third, on appointing a public defender through a transparent process. In 7 other areas, Georgia has achieved some progress. To address, these are the areas to address the issue of political polarization, to guarantee the full functioning of the state institutions, and to further improve the electoral framework, to adopt and implement a transparent and effective judicial reform strategy, to strengthen the independence of the anti-corruption agency, to strengthen the fight against organized crime, to strengthen the protection of human rights of vulnerable groups, and to ensure the involvement of civil society in decision-making processes. So briefly, on the individual steps, what we see on step 1, that is the political polarization, most members of the parliament have ended their boycott of the parliament, and few laws were passed with cross-party support. To fully address this priority, Georgia needs to ensure an efficient oversight of the parliament and end the use of harsh rhetoric and honour past political agreements, notably the one brokered by the European Union, which is called the EU-mediated 19th of April agreement. On step 2, to guarantee the full functioning of state institutions and to further improve the electoral framework, the government has adopted public administration reform strategy and an action plan. The electoral code and the law on political associations were amended to align with them to the Venice Commission recommendations and ODIHR recommendations, but we still need Georgia to improve the parliamentary oversight, to adequately investigate allegations of electoral malpractices, as highlighted in the ODIHR reports, and to reverse the electoral amendments changing the appointment procedure of the CSC chairman. This is the Central Election Commission. On step 3, the inclusive and effective judicial reform, including the High Council of Justice, Georgia needs to submit amendments on judicial reform to the Venice Commission for a second opinion, to adopt a broader reform of the judiciary, especially of the High Council of Justice, and finally, to appoint the remaining non-judge members of the High Council of Justice. On step 4, anti-corruption, a new anti-corruption bureau was set up. To fully address this step, Georgia still needs to ensure that the anti-corruption bureau operates independently and that the Venice Commission is consulted on the draft legislation, and we would ask Georgia to reconsider its decision to withdraw from the OECD anti-corruption network. On step 6, organized crime, Georgia stepped up its cooperation with Europol and the member states. Now Georgia needs to address all the outstanding recommendations of the Council of Europe money wall. On step 8, protection of human rights and vulnerable groups, Georgia needs to ensure that an action plan for a human rights strategy is prepared in an inclusive manner and to ensure freedom of assembly and protection for members of the LGBTQI community. On step 10, involving the civil society in decision-making processes at all levels, Georgia needs to resume constructive dialogue with the civil society and implement regular and transparent consultations. In the area of de-oligarchization, Georgia has achieved limited progress. In this area, the Venice Commission, in its recent recommendation from the 12th of June, reiterated that the draft law should not be adopted in this current form. In this regard, I welcome the announcement made yesterday and the day before by the ruling party that this draft law will not be adopted. Now Georgia has to focus on and adopt a law setting out a systemic approach in line with the Venice Commission recommendations, including by reinforcing rules on competition policy and financing of political parties. Finally, on media pluralism and standards for criminal procedures against media owners, Georgia has reached no progress. In order to fulfill this step, Georgia needs to amend the law on broadcasting, in line with the legal opinion of the Council of Europe, and to ensure the safety of journalists and to raise the level of protection of freedom of journalists and media owners.
The oral report from the European Commission was followed by a special briefing of the President of Georgia, Salome Zourabichvili. She pardoned Tavari TV founder Nika Gvaramia. I came to this decision after all the legal steps had been exhausted and the court rejected the cassation appeal on June 19th. I'm not going to explain why I made this decision, as it is my discretionary right. I just want to remind you what I also said in the European Parliament, that such a decision, the President's discretionary right, is not subject to anyone's pressure, advice, recommendation, or any other type of threat. This is the President's decision, she underscored. The Tbilisi City Court sentenced Gvaramia to 3 years and 6 months in prison for abuse of power over his managerial decisions when he ran Rustavi TV. The overall expectation was that the President would comment on the decision that former Minister of Economy Natia Turnava will be serving as the acting NBG President. Former Economy Minister Natia Turnava on Thursday was elected Vice Governor of the National Bank of Georgia NBG and will therefore temporarily serve as the acting NBG President. The modified law on the National Bank providing the post-related revisions came into force after the Parliament overcame the President's veto. The NBG will have 4 vice governors throughout the transition period until the tenure of one of the vice governors on the board ends. Currently, the NBG board consists of 7 members. Georgian President Salome Zourabichvili presented 2 more candidates to the parliament, but the majority say they will not back them. However, even 7 board members can elect the president, who is then approved by the president. Varhelyi took over as NBG governor when Gvaramya's 7-year term expired on March 2 of this year.
The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.